My name is Claire Bennett. I am 32 years old. 3 months ago, I was standing in my own kitchen making breakfast when I collapsed without warning. By the time the ambulance arrived, my heart had already stopped once. The doctor said I came within minutes of never waking up again, and when I finally learned what caused it, I had to grip the hospital bed just to keep myself from falling apart. But before I tell you what really happened, please like this video and subscribe to Heart Path Stories. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Now let me take you back to the beginning. That morning felt completely ordinary. It was a Tuesday. I remember because I had an early call with a client and I was already running behind. I had just dropped my son off at school. He is 7 years old and his name is Noah. Before he got out of the car, he turned around and looked at me with those big brown eyes and said, "Mom, can we make pancakes tonight?" I laughed and said yes, absolutely yes. He grinned and ran toward the school doors without looking back. I watched him the whole way in, the way I always do, and then I drove home. I worked from home 3 days a week at that point. I had a small consulting job, nothing glamorous, but it paid well and it meant I could be there when Noah got off the bus. My husband had been working longer hours lately. He was trying to get a promotion and I understood that. We were a good team. We had been married for 6 years and even on the hard days, I never questioned us. I trusted him completely. So I got home, made coffee, sat down at my desk. About an hour into my call, I felt something strange. A kind of heaviness behind my eyes. I thought it was just fatigue. I had not been sleeping well that week. I pressed through the call, finished my notes, and then walked into the kitchen to refill my coffee. That is when everything shifted. My vision blurred. My hands went numb. I remember reaching for the counter and missing it entirely. The next thing I knew, I was on the floor and I could not move. I could hear myself breathing, slow and shallow, and I remember thinking, this is wrong. This is very wrong. But I could not make my body respond. I managed to pull my phone from my pocket. I do not know how. Somehow I dialed 911. I could barely speak. The operator kept asking me questions, and I could only get out my address before everything went dark. I woke up in the ICU. There were tubes and monitors everywhere. My throat hurt and my chest felt like something heavy was sitting on top of it. My husband was in the chair beside me, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees and his face in his hands. When he heard me move, he looked up immediately. His eyes were red and swollen. He stood up so fast the chair scraped back against the floor. Hey, I'm right here," he said, and he took my hand in both of his. He looked like he had not slept in days. I later found out he had been there for almost 40 hours straight. My mother arrived that afternoon. My younger sister came too. They stood on the other side of the bed and I could see something in their faces that I did not understand yet. They were glad to see me awake, yes. But there was something else underneath it. A tension. The kind that only exists when people know something they are not saying. The doctors told me what had happened. My potassium levels had dropped to a critically dangerous level. Not from illness, not from any condition I had. The kind of drop they were describing does not happen on its own in a healthy 2-year-old woman. They used the word unexplained, but the way they said it told me they did not actually believe it was unexplained. They said they were running more tests. They asked me about my diet, my supplements, anything I had been taking regularly. I answered everything honestly, and then a doctor said something quietly before leaving the room that I have not forgotten since. She said, "We're going to need to look at everything you consumed in the days before this." My husband stepped out to make a phone call. The moment he left the room, my mother moved closer. She sat on the edge of the chair he had been sitting in and she lowered her voice. "How are you really feeling?" she asked. I told her I was scared and confused. She nodded slowly. Then she looked at the door and back at me. "Has anything felt different lately?" she asked. "At home, I mean." I frowned. "What do you mean different?" She did not answer right away. She just folded her hands in her lap and looked at them. I felt a cold feeling move through me that had nothing to do with the hospital air. "Mom," I said, "what are you not telling me?" She looked up. "Nothing yet," she said. I just want you to focus on getting better." But the way she said it made everything in me go still. 2 days later, a detective came to see me. She was calm and direct, and she did not waste time on small talk. She told me the hospital had flagged my case to the county toxicology unit. The additional testing had come back. There were traces of a diuretic compound in my system, something used in certain medications, but not in anything I had been prescribed. At the level they found it, combined with my naturally low baseline potassium, it had pushed my body into cardiac crisis. She said it plainly. This was not a random medical event. Someone introduced this substance into something you consumed. The room felt like it tilted. I heard myself ask who. She said they were investigating and that they needed to speak with everyone who had regular access to my home, my food, my kitchen. Standard procedure, she said. But nothing about the way she looked at me felt standard. When my husband came back that evening, I told him what the detective had said. I watched his face carefully. He went very still. Then he said, "Tell me everything she told you," so I did. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he sat there for a moment, and then he said, "They're going to look at me first." I know that. He was not angry when he said it. He sounded tired. He sounded like a man who already knew what was coming. "I didn't do this, Claire," he said. "I need you to know that." I looked at him. I thought about the 40 hours he sat in that chair. I thought about the way he held my hand when I woke up. I said, "I know." But over the next several days, the atmosphere in my hospital room changed. My mother and sister started going quiet whenever my husband walked in. My aunt flew in from out of state, and she barely looked at him. I started to notice that my family had formed a kind of silent wall, and he was on the outside of it. I asked my sister directly what was going on. She said, "We just want to make sure you're safe." I asked her what that meant. She looked away. Then my mother's brother, my uncle, came to visit. He pulled my husband aside in the hallway, and I could see them through the glass panel in the door. I could not hear what was said, but I could see my husband's body language. His shoulders went rigid. He turned and walked back in and sat down without saying anything. That night, after visiting hours ended, and it was just the two of us, he told me what my uncle had said. My uncle had told him that the family believed he had done it, that he had been trying to get access to my life insurance policy, that there had been conversations within the family about him for months. I felt sick. Not at my husband. At the idea that this had been building behind my back and no one had told me a word. The detective came back 2 days later. She asked my husband to come in for a formal interview. He agreed without hesitation. He told me he had nothing to hide and that he wanted this resolved as fast as possible. He went. I sat in that hospital room alone for the first time in days, and I let myself think through everything slowly. I went back through every detail I could remember. The weeks before my collapse. Who had been in our home? What I had been eating. My usual routines. And then something came back to me. A small thing I had almost forgotten. About 3 weeks before I collapsed, my cousin had come to stay with us for 4 days. She was going through a rough patch, she said, between apartments, needed a place to land. I had said yes without a second thought because that is what family does. She had been warm and helpful the whole visit. She cooked dinner one night. She bought groceries. She said she wanted to contribute while she was there. I had been grateful. My cousin was 29 and we had grown up close. She was the kind of person who remembered your birthday and sent real cards in the mail. I had never once had a reason to distrust her. But as I lay there in that hospital bed running through the timeline, I realized that her visit had overlapped exactly with the window the detective had identified. The substance builds up over time. It was not a single dose. It was cumulative. Something added in small amounts over several days. I told the detective. I watched her write it down. I felt terrible saying it. I kept telling myself I was probably wrong. I told myself there was surely another explanation. But I gave her my cousin's name, and I gave her the dates of the visit, and I watched her leave the room, and I sat with that for a long time. My husband came home the same day I was discharged. He had not been charged. There was not enough evidence against him, and the timeline was already shifting. We drove home mostly in silence. When we pulled into the driveway, he reached over and put his hand on mine and said, "We're going to figure out what happened." I nodded. I was too tired to say much. But when I walked back into my own kitchen for the first time, I stood in the middle of it and looked at everything and thought about my cousin standing right there where I was standing, moving through that space, touching things, and I felt a chill I could not shake. The investigation moved faster than I expected after that. The detective called me about a week later. She asked me to come in with my husband. We sat across from her in a small room, and she laid out what they had found. My cousin's phone records showed a pattern of searches conducted over a period of months. Searches about medications that affect potassium levels. Searches about how long certain compounds take to build up in the body. Searches about life insurance and estate law in our state. Then she told me the rest. My father had passed away 14 months earlier. He had left behind a property, a house outside the city worth a significant amount of money. In his will, that property was to be divided equally between me and my cousin, who he had treated like a second daughter for most of her life. But there was a clause. If either of us died before the estate was finalized, the surviving party would inherit the full value. The estate had not yet been settled. My cousin knew that. She had actually called the estate attorney twice in the months before my collapse. I sat in that room, and I did not cry. I think I had moved past the kind of shock that produces tears. I just felt a deep, hollow, quiet settle over me. My cousin, the person who used to sleep over at my house when we were kids. The person who cried at my wedding. She had sat in my home and cooked food in my kitchen and looked at my son and come to my table, and she had been doing this the whole time. My cousin was arrested the following Thursday. Her boyfriend was also brought in for questioning. Investigators found messages between them discussing the plan, discussing the property, discussing what would happen once I was gone. She had told him it would look like a health event. She had told him no one would question it. My husband and I were home the evening she was arrested. We did not find out until the next morning when the detective called. I remember standing in the kitchen again when I got that call, the same kitchen where everything had happened, and I thought about Noah asking for pancakes. I thought about how close it came to him growing up without a mother. I had to set the phone down on the counter for a minute before I could finish the conversation. My cousin was charged with attempted murder and criminal poisoning. Her boyfriend was charged as an accessory. The case went to trial 8 months later. The phone records, the search history, the messages between them, the evidence from the estate attorney's records, all of it was presented. She was convicted on both counts. She was sentenced to 22 years. Her boyfriend received 9 years as an accessory. I sat in that courtroom and I watched them read the verdict, and I felt nothing that I expected to feel. No relief, not really, no satisfaction. Just a grief that did not have a clean shape. Because you cannot celebrate the imprisonment of someone you loved your whole life. You can only sit with the fact of what they were willing to do. My husband and I went through a hard season after that. Not because of any fault between us, but because something like this changes the air inside a home. We went to counseling together. We talked through every piece of it more times than I can count. Slowly, the air started to clear. Noah turned 8. We made the pancakes he asked for, finally, on a Sunday morning, and he sat at the counter and helped pour the batter, and he had no idea what the last year had cost us to get to that moment. Watching him, I thought, this is why you survive, this right here. My mother has never fully recovered from the guilt of having suspected my husband. She apologized to him directly and at length, and he accepted it with more grace than most people would have been capable of. My uncle has not spoken to me since the trial. I think he cannot face the fact of how wrong he was. I have made my peace with that. What I carry now is not bitterness, though it took a long time to get there. What I carry is the understanding that the people closest to you are not always safe, that someone can love you in all the ways that count and still make a choice that reveals something in them you never saw coming. My cousin knew my son's name. She knew his favorite color. She had held him when he was a baby. And she still did what she did. If there is anything I want you to take from this, it is not fear. Do not let it make you afraid of the people around you. Let it make you honest. Let it remind you to look clearly at the people in your life, not with suspicion, but with real attention. Because sometimes the danger does not come from somewhere far away. Sometimes it has a key to your front door and knows where you keep the coffee. I am okay now. My son is okay. My marriage is okay. And every morning when I walk into that kitchen, I choose to walk in without dread. Because that kitchen is mine, and that life is mine, and no one gets to take that from me. Not anymore.